Awesome. Hi, William. Really good to have you with us today. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
As you know, we're starting these community sessions and community stories where we're sharing stories from different community members and big ideas that you have. And you're a valued community member, and there are some really exciting insights that you've been sharing with us. And we just wanted to share that with the wider community. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Like starting these with a bit of an introduction about yourself. So if you don't mind introducing yourself to people who may not know you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so my name's William Baker Jones. My current role is the deputy head of BIM and digital engineering for a company called Babcock International Group, primarily based in the southwest of England, down in Plymouth. My sort of current day-to-day job is looking after the information management, BIM, and sort of data side of our major infrastructure program, which is a couple £1 billion worth of capital expenditure in the Devonport Royal Dockyard to support the submarine fleet. On the side of that, I'm an architect by trade. Went to Plymouth University to study architecture. Didn't quite get on with architecture, if I'm brutally honest. I had quite a personal accident. I broke my back, in effect, and from that I had to take a step out from university, and that's where I fell in love with BIM. I'm a bit of a computer nerd and like to know how things operate and things work. So in that sort of time off in university, I sort of understood or valued what BIM and information management was. So when I eventually graduated university, I went into an architectural practice, sort of brought BIM and things to the forefront. We won a few contracts, but still the architectural side wasn't sort of doing it for me. Then I sort of moved on to a tier one contractor, Kia Construction, where I sort of learned a lot about BIM and information management, particularly in the sort of construction side, and how that interfaces on the contractor, and sort of what value that can bring to sort of companies and clients and projects and the like. So that's sort of how my sort of journey has started. Also sort of heavily involved in sort of wider industry groups such as NEMA, where I sort of co-lead the operations side of NEMA. I also look after the construction domain part of Building Smart UK and Ireland, where we talk about interoperability and open standards and advocate the use of IFC and IDS and things like that. So we sort of regularly get together to host events about that. And on the side, I've also got an architectural company and a digital company, which I've recently set up with a friend as well. So that's a bit about me and sort of what I'm doing.
First, I'm sorry to hear about your back, but
yes,
I think it's fair to say that the BIM world gained as a result of that, like just given the number of initiatives you're involved in and everything you're contributing to the community, I think has been absolutely great. So yeah, I am sorry to hear about that, but at the same time, I like seeing problems as opportunities. So I think
that's it.
You've brought a lot to the community, and it's really
everything happens for a reason.
Side of the fence.
Yeah, cool.
Now, the reason why I wanted to have you here is one of the things I'm lucky with is I get to speak with a lot of our community members and people who are using the platform in different ways, and I get to hear what makes them tick and like big ideas that they have. And one of the things that struck me in one of the conversations that we were having was the way you articulated the business value of information management and the role that has in bringing certainty to projects. And you also talked a lot about the move from reactive planning to proactive planning. And I see a lot of these things as related in many ways. So I'm just curious, can you share a bit more about that with everyone?
Yeah, I think for me, obviously the whole premise behind sort of BIM and information management is to understand the value of information in organizations. And so my sort of outlook on that is a lot of organizations and companies and even projects to some extent, they don't value information. as much as they would, say, a contract or such. So one of the things I'm sort of trying to push is getting individuals to actually understand the value of information, structured information, and from that you can then leverage that to inform better decisions. I think one of my university dissertations was on the data, information, and knowledge principles. And so if you're getting that key data in the first instance, translating that into sort of valuable information, you can make better informed decisions and knowledge from that. So for me, yeah, it's about setting out key expectations, and that information sort of underpins everything that we do. Babcock are a very health and safety oriented organization, and so if you're making these health and safety decisions based on unstructured, unvalidated information, then the decision makings will obviously reflect that. It's that classic term, garbage in, garbage out. So for me, the real sort of key fundamentals to how we can sort of transform, particularly in the construction industry, is valuing our information, and how we procure that, how we deliver that, how we validate that, and how we consume that. For me, that is key. And at the forefront of that, information management, aligned with the UK BIM framework and ISO 19650, etc., it is key to unlocking that. So yeah, that's sort of my approach, and sort of the value of information can bring to organizations. You can't see the value of information necessarily in a monetary value. Okay, you can see a value of a contract, but what's the value of having bad information associated with that contract, as an example? It all comes down to information, in my opinion. So valuing that for me is key.
Awesome. And you've talked to me, and you just started touching on that as well, but you've talked to me before about the importance of specifying the information when it's needed, and relaying that and procurement in order to start, in order to move and understand better, then track eventually what you've received versus what you haven't received, to move forward towards more proactive planning rather than reactive planning. Can you talk me through a bit of that, and how you look at that, and
I think,
see that adding value?
Yeah, exactly. And I think in the context of sort of BIM and information management, obviously it all starts from your information requirements. So what, as an organization or as a project, you require from information, it starts from there. You set out your store at the start. What we tend to do in the construction industry is we sort of go straight for design and build, but actually we need to understand what information do we need in order to get to that position. And if we get that in a structured way, I'm a really big advocate of BSEN 17412, which is the level of information needs standard, which outlines exactly how you should outline your information requirements, from geometry, i.e. CAD or 3D modeling, alphanumerical data, and then documentation requirements. Once you get those three sort of key concepts aligned and your information aligned to those, it's then almost working backwards and saying, when do we need this information? When do we need the setting out information for a building, as an example? The planners will know when we need information because they'll have it in their plan. So then you kind of work backwards and go, in order to achieve the setting out that we need on site, we need the setting out pack of information, which may be XYZ information. We need that by the 1st of July. You put that in your information requirements as a delivery milestone, and then in the context of sort of 19650, you then respond to that using your task information delivery plan with, I'm going to deliver it on X day, which then encapsulates within your MIDP, which you can then benchmark against your CD to see if you've actually delivered it. So you go from the ask to the response, which is the task information delivery plan, to the deliver, in effect, in your MIDP and your sort of reporting tools, in effect. And the reason why that's key is if information is slipping and you're not getting it when you want it, now a designer or an architect may not necessarily see the wider picture of why you need that information on the 1st of August, as an example. I don't know, you may have a procurement window that you need to hit because it's coming from overseas or something like that. And unless you hit that procurement date, you may not wait. You may have to wait a couple of months, as an example. So getting those dates around information delivery for me is key, because, like I said, if you miss those dates, the people who are producing the information may not know what knock-on effect that information not being delivered on time may have on the project, and that may have massive implications on projects, particularly these large sort of major infrastructure projects. As an example, their procurement windows are like 4 years. So if you miss that information delivery, as an example, you're going to have a significant sort of knock-on effect, and maybe even on the critical path as well. So maybe even just missing from one report, you can have a major impact on the project. So it's finding that sort of balance and effect between getting the information there, but also finishing the project as well.
I think the really interesting thing there, and like we do a lot of work when it comes obviously to like the specifying of these requirements and delivery planning and like tracking, and one of the things we think a lot about is how do we quantify ROI. And a lot of what we'll initially focus on is the time, the automation that we achieve and how we streamline the tracking process itself, and the time we save on the one information manager or the two information managers who are responsible for doing this tracking. But the interesting thing is, and what you're saying is, yeah, that could be saving me circa 10, 20,000 pounds a year. But what you're saying is, if I slip on any of these, that can have actually massive impacts on a project, which is worth like millions a day or like hundreds of thousands a day or more. And that tends to be much harder to quantify.
Exactly.
I'm just curious, how do you think about risk, and when you're speaking internally as a business, like and just when you're talking about information management more broadly, like how do you articulate that risk, or how do you make people value that risk today, which is something that can happen 2 or 3 years or 4 years down the line, and it will not always happen. It's risk by its very nature. I'm just curious, like how do you navigate that?
Yeah, well, you can't really. The main way you kind of get around it in ISO 19650, it says there's an information delivery risk register. Okay, you can say the risks in there, but actually trying to outline that if you miss a report by, I don't know, a couple of weeks as an example, yes, that will have a significant knock-on effect to the program. But for me, it goes back to the original statement about the value of information. Again, there's some quotes are going around about sort of information or data is the new oil, which I kind of agree with. But then you can argue that information can be duplicated, it can be manipulated, it can be exploited, it can be used multiple times, etc. So it's getting the information, the value of that information into people's heads, so that actually it may cost £1,000 to produce a drawing, as an example, but actually that drawing and what it will produce may cost 10,000, £100,000 as an example. And if that is missed, then that may have a significant knock-on effect on the program. And how you can control that is via the master information delivery plan. Because if you see that a date in effect has been missed, you can retrospectively then sort of look at the delay that may have, and that information may have dependencies, as I said, on procurement. It may even have dependencies on other information, as an example. You may have a concept feasibility study that may then inform another sort of scheme or detailed design report. If you miss that initial stage, it's going to have a knock-on effect on those further pieces of information. So we've got to think of information as an asset, and something that we need to value. And for me, trying to convince project managers and engineers about the value of information is probably what I spend most of my time doing, is just outlining you can't see that tangible cost, and it's not necessarily quantifiable, but it's just getting that if this is missed on this date, there's going to be problems, as an example. And I've got some projects at the moment. I can't disclose the sort of the run rate and the daily rate of the projects, but if we miss a couple of days or a couple of weeks, that's a serious, and I mean serious, amount of money, because we're hit with strict deadlines. So when you're working in sort of to strict deadlines, information delivery is key, because everything revolves around information delivery. You can't do your tenders without information. You can't do your contracts without information. It all pins down to information. And there was a quote by Emma Hooper who said, as an industry obsessed with risk, we don't understand or value the risk of poor information or bad information. I thought that was a really good quote because it is absolutely true. Our tier one contractors in this industry are obsessed with risk. Nobody's obsessed with the risk of bad information. And it's a really interesting point and something that I sort of quote almost daily at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think some of it is as a result of the fact that one of the things we think about a lot is like how to relay this, of course, to companies. I think the problem in some ways, or the challenge in information management in BIM, is it became the BIM thing. And I think level of information need and just like the reframing into information management is an opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason I say that is if you go and tell a design manager BIM risk or information risk, they won't really care. But if you tell them their design deliverable tracker and their design documents and their design deliverables have they be completed, suddenly they care a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that they have a tracker for that, like in place already, and they'll be trying to manage that in anyways. But when you say an MIDP, they'll be like, they may or may not care about what an MIDP is. And I think the interesting thing is, in some ways, information management is actually a framework for bringing together a lot of what we've already had in place. Like I have some companies that will tell me sometimes we're just this is a new thing. I'm like, well, every construction contract always has these are the contractual deliverables that I expect from you. That is at the core of information management. Like
we've been doing BIM.
Exactly.
And I said to someone a few months ago, we've been doing BIM for hundreds of years. And in fact, it's just we've been doing it in a paper-based approach. We've been managing our information. I've been looking at some historical records in Devonport that are like 200 years old. They were managing their information. You can look at the title blocks on these pieces of information, or these hand drawings, and they've got all the approvals and the stamps and all there. And they manage their information in a physical way. We're just in the digital domain now. And they valued that information because, unfortunately, if they lost that floor plan that was hand drawn, somebody had to redraw it. So they valued that piece of information a lot more than we do in sort of the digital space. And I thought that was a really interesting concept when I saw that. I was like, wow, we're just doing it digitally. And I think that's probably where people struggle the most at the moment.
I think that's actually really interesting. You're saying that in the physical world or in the old world, you actually, if you lost it, you lost it.
Exactly.
Whereas here, it's much harder to lose it. Yeah, exactly. So there was much more value on the work that was done there. Whereas here, it's something that happens in the digital world. And it's like we can easily access it, and it's much more easy to make changes to it.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, the production of information has become much cheaper. And in some ways, as a result of that, we value it less. And actually, we're just speaking about ChatGPT and like some of the things that can result in, which I think is only another example of that.
Yeah, and I think an interesting about the paper-based approach, and I know the sort of the whole idea around digitalization and things is to move away from a paper-based sort of industry. But I did a talk at Digital Construction Week last week, and one of the things that I'm really interested in is information security. And one of the things I spoke about in the talk was about organizations, don't care about their information, but they also don't care about the security as well. And so arguably, paper-based approach is the most secure because once it's gone, it's gone. You I don't know, burn it as an example, that's it. It's not coming back. However, if you host this information in a cloud repository, as an example, that's it. It's in 5 places, 10 places, 1,000 places, and you're not getting that back. So valuing information security as well is key for me. And now maybe that's because I'm in the security domain, but increasing the ease of access also increases the risk of security breaches, and you don't know where that information goes. Does it go to someone who has bad intentions? Do they just want to cause a nuisance or wide-scale terrorism, as an example? We don't necessarily know. So we're getting into a world of digitalization, also getting into a world of security breaches and things like that. So when we are producing and procuring our information, we've got to be aware of the security implications of it. And then we ask the question about, sensitive assets and information about sensitive assets. Now, there is some guidance around sensitive assets, but for me, a sensitive asset is subjective. My house, in effect, is sensitive to me, but it's not deemed as a sensitive asset. So would I want all my floor plans and stuff all on the public domain? Probably not. So again, we've got to, if we are looking at BIM and information management and those sort of things, we've got to consider the security implications as well. And that's what ISO 9650 Part 5 outlines. I got some really good feedback and comments on my talk, and that's one of the things we were talking about just before this, is about AI and LLMs. People aren't really aware of the security implications of those applications. If you're launching loads of sensitive information into these large language models, it can be exploited and extracted at pace and at speed. So if people are doing information management and producing information management and procuring information, just got to be cognizant of the security risks. And that's sort of going back to the paper-based approach as well. Once you lock it in a room, that's it. It's never going out that room, as an example. So back in the olden days, if you were going through sort of approval workflow and person A went to person B and then to person C, people valued that transaction a lot more, because if person B, I don't know, spill a load of coffee on it, as an example, it's never going to get to person C and they're never going to be able to order it and things. So it's just being aware of that as well. But I think we've got complacent is probably the best word for how we manage our information, particularly in the digital age as well. And it's very easy to do as well. It's passive. We're humans, path of least resistance as well. We will go the quickest way. We'll just email it. We'll print it. We'll do that sort of stuff. Didn't have that back in the olden days.
One of the ones that's always interesting for me in security, and obviously it's because like where I sit, but I often get the question of are you secure? And what we're being compared against is an Excel file.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah.
Well, you know who's accessing the system. You have control over who accesses it and who extracts data from it.
Yeah.
With an Excel file, it can just be flying around between many different people, and you don't even know that that's where it's going. And I'm 100% with you. I think security is by far one of the is already an important topic, but it's going to become more and more important, and access rights and so on and so
exactly
forth.
And that's one of the sort of concerns I have with, or not concerns in effect, or sort of one of my objections around smart cities and IoT and things like that. I know we're sort of going a bit off topic here, but it's the security implications of sharing all of that sort of infrastructure data in the public domain. If somebody had the wrong intentions, they could abuse that, as I said, for various good or bad, in fact. So it's just being aware of who has access to the information. Do they need to see that information? What's the implications of sharing that information as well? I think one thing we can learn from, particularly in the built environment, Babcock are a marine engineering company. That's primarily what we do. We maintain the Royal Navy warships. And we do a lot of systems engineering. And one thing I've learned from sort of exploring how systems engineering is done, there's the similarities between information management and systems engineering. And one thing I'm a big advocate of is not reinventing the wheel on every opportunity. I think that's something we do a lot in the construction industry, and we like to just start again on every opportunity. And so systems engineering sort of aligns in a more structured approach to how you'd procure a warship, as an example, or a train or something like that, and how they manage their information within that domain arguably is better than how we manage it in the construction domain. And that's where I feel there's a lot of parallels between what we do and what they do, that I'm starting to learn and sort of leverage that knowledge and embed that into our business processes around the information management sphere as well. And that's sort of more aligned to the process side of things, in the sort of people, process and technology. The systems engineering sort of lies in the process. And from a technology perspective, that's sort of where you come from, is in the platform or the technology that can then manage that systems or that data or that structure in something like Morta.
100%. I think I'm with you. I got some exposure to systems engineering as well, because we our first one of our first pieces of work was on end-to-end requirement management, and
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, to be honest, systems engineering is an exercise of information management. Like the V diagram of I set a requirement, I plan out what work I want, I then check whether what has been delivered has actually fulfilled the requirements. Like that is fundamentally what systems engineering boils down to, and like that's the core principle behind any of the information management processes. Just wanted like coming to the drawing a close to the session. I wanted to just check, based on everything we said, I think really what you're saying is there are a lot of intangibles that are important in the business value of information management, and I feel like even security can be like a part of that. So while it felt like a tangent, I think it is an intangible when it comes to information management. How would you, going back to that initial question, like how would you what tips would you give to an information manager who's relaying the value of information management and both the tangibles and the intangibles, I guess, as a closing remark?
I think we have a tendency to complicate things. So for me, it's keep it simple, stupid. And so outline real, clear, high level what are the implications of not doing it, but also the implications of doing it, in fact. So keeping it simple, again, if you talk to your directors or senior leadership team in your organizations, they don't necessarily need to know the detail. They just need to know the high level outline objectives, in effect. And when you start actually talking quite sort of simple, plain language, plain language is a sort of term we use in the BIM space quite a lot, but when you talk sort of plain language to the sort of senior leaders of organizations, they get it. They do get it. But what we tend to do is dive straight in, full BIM, ISO 9650. We start flashing up slides and all this sort of stuff. And you just completely lose people in that position. People understand information. It's just then getting them to understand the value of that information and what it can do for them as well. If you structure it and procure it in a certain way, then it's only for the betterment of them. Everybody's got experience of trying to find information, source information, procure information. Again, BIM's not there to solve that, but it's there to help that. And so giving those risk benefits and use cases about why we should be doing information management as well. And yeah, just like I said, don't do too much at one time. That's one thing I see so much is people just go full steam ahead, and it just completely crashes. And then there's a big misconception in the industry about what BIM is, and that doesn't help because you go into an organization, they've got BIM in their contracts, and then they've got a preconceived view of what it is, and then it's trying to distill those and actually really set the stall about what information management is, and just start slowly from there. That's my sort of take on it anyway.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, William, for sharing your insights with us today. And as I said, like I think the community is really lucky to have you and have everything you're pushing for. And apart from the fact that we've talked a lot about the business value, we was having a conversation with business value and information management. I was having a conversation with one of your ex-colleagues from Kier like the other day, and we were talking about how you're carving a niche for yourself in the security field. So
yeah,
because I definitely think it's like one of those topics that, as you said, isn't talked about often and is really important. So thanks a lot for sharing.
No, fantastic. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you for letting me having this talk. Really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure.